Conflict is not resolvable through silence. It's also not resolvable through violence. Conflict is only manageable through dialogue. Have you ever had a conflict go badly? Spouse? Surely not. Significant other? Perhaps. Boyfriend, girlfriend, mom, dad, grandparent, uncle, sister, brother? I know I have. I want to share, I've had lots of conflict is what I should say. I want to share with you one particular conflict that I experienced to kind of give us a framework for looking at how communication can affect that. Charles Graham is from Southeast Arkansas, Dermot, Arkansas. He and I could not be more different. He's tall, I'm short. He's black, I'm white. He's skinny, I'm not as skinny as he is. And he also, I grew up in a middle-class house in North St. Louis County, and he grew up a child along with 12 siblings whose parents were sharecroppers on a cotton plantation in Southeast Arkansas. So again, we couldn't be more different. We met in college, and we hit it off really well. He was a part of a ministry team that I was a part of. Much like IWU, we would send out revival teams or ministry teams to area churches around southwest Missouri. And he was a music evangelist of sorts, and I was doing a puppet ministry, so my puppets and his music and one of our friends who preached all traveled together, and we'd be gone virtually every weekend somewhere. So again, we hit it off really well. After I graduated from that institution and went to another institution to work on my graduate degree, I did not realize this, but Charles transferred schools, and so he ended up at the same place finishing his undergrad that I did working on a graduate degree in theater. So we decided to become roommates, and that's when I discovered we have lots of differences. I do not iron my clothes. Well, I did not iron my clothes back then. He ironed everything. T-shirts, underwear, everything. My idea of ironing was to take my pants, fold them up, lay them underneath the mattress, and sleep on them overnight, and that was good enough for me. So again, we had a few minor spats at that point in time, but we still remained really good friends. I graduated from there. He went on to finish his degree at a third institution that was a little more keyed in with his music evangelism that he was interested in doing. And I went off to work in a local church as a youth minister. And so we continued to work a little bit at that time, but I decided I need to go to seminary. And so I ended up going to seminary. You know what seminary is for. Seminary is this idea that they will prepare you for ministry. And so what happened with Charles and me being prepared for ministry is he, all of a sudden one day, his mode of transportation just quit. So he had no vehicle with which to do his evangelism. And so I found out about it. He and I talked. I had an extra vehicle that I really didn't need. We were living on seminary grounds, and I worked there, so I didn't need a car for that purpose. And we had a second car. So we told him we'd sell it to him. And I honestly can't remember the price of it. I think we agreed on a price of $1,200 to $2,400, something like that, for an old van. And he agreed to do it, and I agreed to take monthly payments. And things were great. I got monthly payment first month, second month, there was that check again. Third month, boom, right on time. Fourth month, on time. Fifth month, no check. Oh, okay, something happened. Sixth month, no check. Not only was there no check, there was no indication that there would be no check. There was little, if any, communication. After 6 months of receiving no checks, I called Charles and I said, we need to get together and talk. And so he came over. It was on a Friday afternoon. We met. He happened to be in town. And I said, I need the money. I'm working 2 part-time jobs. Marilyn, my wife, is teaching full-time. We have a child in child care, and we're having a tough time making ends meet. And I'll never forget what he said to me, because I gave him a couple of options. I said, you can catch up on the payments and continue to make monthly payments, or you can give me all $1,200, which was the balance at that point. And he said to me, well, you don't understand. And I said, I don't understand what? He said, I'm in the ministry. And I got to tell you, at that particular moment in time, that was a trigger in my mind because I was in seminary preparing to go and be in ministry. And I said, what's the difference? What am I, chopped liver? I actually said that to him. And I said, here's the deal. I don't want any more monthly payments. I want the full balance by Sunday evening, or I'm taking the van back. I have a set of keys. I'll come get it, and it will be mine once again. I don't know what he did between Friday and Sunday night, but he showed up at my house Sunday night at 10 o'clock with $1,200 cash in his hand. And I gave him the title, and we parted, I don't want to say amicably, because we did not speak for 7 years. Did not speak. We had been roommates. We'd lived together. We'd been to each other's homes, worshiped together, ministered together for years. And that was just kind of a conflict that was irreconcilable differences, if you will. And so what I want to tell you is that conflict is not resolvable through silence. It's also not resolvable through violence, as much as many people think it is, especially in the world that we live in today. Conflict is only manageable through dialogue. That's the only way that it occurs. And so I want to share with you a little bit about dialogue, what it is, where it comes from, and how we can engage in it more mindfully as time goes on. So by the time we get finished today, you should be able to grasp the coordinated management of meaning. It's a communication theory that I'll tell you a little bit about. You also should be able to understand that dialogue is the best form of interaction. I also hope you will be able then to engage in mindful dialogue and employ dialogue to manage conflicts in your own relationships. So before I get going too much further, I asked you earlier if you ever had a conflict go badly. Perhaps you're in a relationship right now where there has been conflict and it's not going as well as you might hope. Here's what I want to suggest to you is keep that person or those people in mind as we talk about this and see if some of these ideas might not help you overcome some of the dialogue and get back into a healthier relationship. The idea of dialogue is that it coordinates meaning for us and the social realities that we create. And so I want to talk about the coordinated management of meaning. A couple of scholars, communication scholars, Vernon Cronin and Barnett Pierce, developed this theory. And essentially, the theory in a nutshell says this. Persons in conversation co-construct their own social realities that are simultaneously shaped by the worlds they create. Now, I want you to notice a few words there. There's construct, there is reality, and then there is the word creation. This is not unlike the way God creates. If you remember Genesis chapter 1:1, it says, in the beginning God created. There's that create word, the heavens and the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep. And God said, let there be light. Said. That's construct. And the idea of constructing a reality and constructing social realities in communication and through conversation, what we do is very much like the way God created the heavens and the earth. He spoke it and it happened. Words matter. And so you'll see in the case of this that words matter for us. One of the ways that happens is that we create our world through communication. Think about the things in your room where you spend most of your time. What do you surround yourself with? Are there pictures on the wall? Are there stuffed animals maybe? Are there sports memorabilia? Do you keep a tidy bed, or do you make your bed every morning, or leave it kind of the way I did most of the way through college, totally unmade? I don't think I made my bed until I was married, actually. My wife taught me how to do that. Those things create your reality. You want some comfort? Where do you go for the comfort? You hungry? What do you go for that? So we create our world by the things that we surround ourselves with. And then also that world then in turn creates us. I want you to think about 5 adjectives that have been used to describe you. 5 adjectives. Now pick one of those. Do you have one in mind? That particular adjective, when did you first hear it ascribed to you? Can you remember? Who was the first person who spoke that word into your life? Is it a positive adjective or a negative adjective? If it's a positive one, it probably boosts your self-esteem and makes you feel better about yourself. If it's a negative adjective, it probably does the exact opposite and makes you feel bad about yourself. And so the idea here is that when we put words into being, like God spoke them into being, the words themselves affect the reality in which we live. And so that's the social reality that we're talking about. I'm not talking about the ability for us to speak and actually have, make a straw or make a camel or anything like that. But we have the ability to make other people's day. We have the ability to resolve conflict. We have the ability to destroy other people with our sharp barbs, wits, and sarcasm. Words matter. And so what I want to talk then about is that dialogue coordinates this meaning with others who have different backgrounds, values, beliefs without trying to change them. I mentioned my college roommate, different background, different values, similar beliefs because we were both Christian. As we do that, though, let me reiterate this. Dialogue is the best form of interaction. What's the opposite of dialogue? Can you think of an antonym for dialogue? Martin Buber could. He was a Jewish theologian, philosopher back in Germany before World War II, and he wrote a book that's become a favorite of mine. It's called I, Thou. And in the book, he makes this distinction between people who use monologue as a major means of communication or dialogue, where people are in under this umbrella of coordinated management of meaning. 2 people get together and construct their own reality, whether as a monologue is somebody trying to construct a reality for you that they think is best for you. Do you understand the difference? Here's the way he stated in his book, I, it. Do you have any of those relationships, I, it? Now, I'm sure you have relationships with your computer. That would be an I, it relationship. You probably have a relationship with an ATM somewhere on campus. That's an I, it relationship. You may have an I, it relationship with somebody who's serving you food in the cafeteria line. I want that. Give me that. Like extra mayo. You're treating the person as something other than a human being. Does that make sense? The best way I can share with you how to do that is my children, when they were growing up, we gave them allowance, and the idea of their allowance was $1 times the year they were old every week. So that by the time they got to be 16, they were getting $16 a week times 4. And at the end of those, their 15th birthday, and they wanted to drive a car, I said, here's the deal. You can either continue to get an allowance, or you can have car insurance, but not both. And they all took me up on the car insurance. Wise choice for them, poor choice for me. Car insurance way more expensive than allowance was. But they would come to me occasionally when they were out of money, and they would say, Dad, I need $20. And I would say, what? Do I look like a bank to you? Because their request of $20 from me was not a relational interaction. You see that? But the reaction was more of something they wanted and knew I had it. And so I got treated like a banker. Other times I got treated like a car salesman. Dad, I need the car tonight. Can I borrow the car? Instead of engaging in a conversation just to have a conversation. Parent, child, roommate kind of thing where there's no agenda whatsoever. That's what an I-thou relationship is, where you treat the other person as worthy of respect as you treat yourself. Jesus said to love others as we love ourselves. That's the concept of an I-thou relationship. You have a relationship with somebody just to get to know them, not to make them a Christian, not to convince them to watch Much Ado About Nothing on television like I did with you earlier, because there's something in it for me. A real conversation, an I-thou conversation, you're not in it for you. You're in it for the relationship, or you're in it for the other person. It's one in which we treat one another as human beings rather than as objects. Make sense? So, again, this idea then of choosing dialogue as a different kind of communication that honors relationships above perspectives, positions, and interests. The biggest communication problem we have is that we listen instead of listening to understand, we listen to reply. You ever been guilty of that? The other person's talking and the thought processes in your head are, when they ever shut up, or if I can interrupt them, I've got something even better to say. That's not an I-thou relationship. So in order for that to happen, you have to be aware of it. So the idea of engaging in mindful dialogue. And what I want to tell you is, this is not rocket science. It's not. I teach about listening. Listening is not rocket science. It comes sort of naturally. But we get caught up in some negative habits and behaviors that make us terrible at listening. And we get caught up in negative behaviors and habits that make us terrible conversationalists. And so what I want you to understand then is as you become aware of these, even in the middle of a conversation, as you become aware of them, you can stop, drop and roll, as they said in preschool. You can stop, remember to be mindful in this conversation, and sometimes simply shut up and let the other person talk. And the way that happens is dialogue requires that you have rules of engagement. Now, there are lots of them. I'll share with you only two, because these two will just change fundamentally the way you carry on a conversation with one another. One of them is, remember that there are two people there. You can have a monologue with nobody around. Try and have a dialogue by yourself. Someone will think you're crazy talking to yourself, especially if you do it out loud. So there are two people there. Be mindful of that. You might all of a sudden discover in the middle of a conversation that you are talking all the time and really haven't heard the other person say a word. Pause. Breathe. Listen. The second rule of engagement I'd share with you is kind of similar. It's, okay, you understand that there are two people there now. Let's take turns. Let's take turns. Now, you might be surprised if I tell you that a lot of conversations are monologic, because people are taking turns, but one person says their piece and the other person says their piece, and there's no evidence that they're paying attention to one another or listening to one another. And so taking turns is things like maybe not interrupting, or instead of taking another turn, asking a question. So what do you think about that? And give them a chance to respond so that you invite the conversation rather than continue to guide it with dialogue, or with monologue, I should say. Second one is that dialogue explores contexts of meaning. And what I will tell you about this is, you both come into a conversation, I don't care what it is, any kind of conflict, you come into it from two different perspectives. And you know all about yours. You could write books about your perspective. You may think you know the other person's perspective, but you may have no clue. You might be having a conversation or a conflict with somebody and they are just being unbelievably difficult to work with. but you're not even aware of the fact that maybe they got a phone call 10 minutes before your conversation telling them about a loved one who was killed in a car wreck. You don't know about it. You assume that you know everything about them, but you've got to understand the context of meaning. And so my friend who grows up in Southeast Arkansas, I got to start to figure him out. What is it about you that makes you tick? What are the things you like? So I'm focused on him rather than on me, which kind of creates this meaningful dialogue. So engage in these contexts of meanings by asking and answering questions. Actually, the way I wrote it down in my notes is be sure to answer and ask questions. Do you note the difference? So it's not you talking, it's the other person talking first and asking a question, and then you can answer the question because you're providing them with something they need rather than something you want to do. And then be mindful of the fact that your conversation is going to create a new reality. Whatever you say to one another is going to change that. One of the things I didn't tell you about coordinated management of meanings, one of the kind of ancillary themes that goes with it is that every conversation has an afterlife. You ever walk out of a class with a teacher and start immediately conversing with somebody about something that was said or done in class? Most classes have an afterlife. Every conversation has one as well. We had a movie night with some freshman communication majors the other day, and it was interesting because we had a dialogue, and the very next day, one of my colleagues comes up to me and said, "You remember that conversation we had last night?" And started all over again, and it went in an entirely different direction. So be mindful of what you talk about is going to be like nuclear waste, around for a long time. So create some positive residual effect rather than negative. And then in terms of engaging mindful dialogue, explore differences. Treat everyone's story, including your own, as incomplete, unfinished, biased, and inconsistent. You ever have a bad day? Allow other people to have a bad day. You're having a bad day? Allow them to have a bad day as well. And then also treat everyone's stories, including your own, as dependent on their perspectives, their histories, and their purposes, what they're going to be about. And then the last thing I'd say about that is just be curious about other people's stories. You're going to meet hundreds of new people over the next few weeks or months or years, hundreds of them. Get to know something about them. I learned something completely new from someone I have known a very, very long time this week, and it shocked me. And I was surprised that I didn't know it and a little bit embarrassed that I'd never asked. When it comes to conflict and this idea of being curious about other people's stories, things are only simple when we choose not to understand them. Things are only simple when we choose not to understand them. So when it comes to dialogue and using dialogue to manage conflict, there are a couple of things. Number one, discover the heart of the matter. It's not always on the surface. It's not always what they are mentioning or what you're thinking about. It's oftentimes deeper. Discover the heart of the matter. And then build respect. Respect the other person. Allow them to respect you. Because if you respect them, you'll be more likely to listen to them. And then if you'll listen to them, you'll be more likely to adapt and coordinate the meaning of your relationship in a better way. Explore some common ground. What do you have in common? I mean, obviously you've got differences, but what do you have in common? And then build a context for that collaboration. My roommate, Charles, I mentioned that we departed ways and did not speak for 7 years. I can't remember who it was. I think it was my wife that got us together. Charles and I think still, we've attributed it to something serendipitous, but we've come to discover that we think it was my wife that got us back together in the same space. And we saw one another, and we started a conversation, and it was like we were best friends again, like the conflict had never happened. But then we got ready that afternoon because we ended up meeting, it was like McDonald's or something, and it came time to leave. It wasn't a McDonald's because it was a restaurant, we had to pay the bill. And we had to pay the bill, and we fought over it. You see the difference? Earlier we were fighting over who's going to get money you've been keeping from me, and now we're both trying to give it away. And now for years, just as a habit and a way to teach myself, I don't ever miss a month without supporting his ministry. I give him 5% of my income every month. And it's like, I don't want to deal with this conflict ever again. I don't want it to be over money, maybe over other things. He went back years later, bought the plantation that his parents worked as sharecroppers on, and turned this mansion, dilapidated mansion, into a bed and breakfast for pastors and evangelists from all over the world in Arkansas, southeast Arkansas. I've been twice to help him work on it. I helped replace the columns, and I also helped replace the siding on a shed. And so the last picture that you see is one of him and me surveying the work we had done on the shed by putting the siding up. And it's my wife's favorite picture. So let's review. Conflict is manageable through dialogue. If you understand this whole concept of the coordinated management of meaning and understand that dialogue is the best form of interaction and you engage in it mindfully, then you can employ dialogue to manage the conflict. Again, it's manageable through dialogue. Look in a mirror. How many eyes? How many ears? How many mouths? Listen twice as much as you talk. Let me end with a quote I shared earlier. The biggest communication problem is that we do not listen to understand, we listen to respond. If we could flip that, we'd remove most of the conflict that we experience in our own lives and even around the world.
Bringing Central Indiana home to you. This is WIWU-TV 51 Marion.